I never imagined those words would haunt me the way they did. My daughter-in-law raised 4 kids alone, and apparently, I couldn't even handle her. The cruelty in her voice still makes my hands shake. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. My name is Margaret, and for 67 years I've called Chicago home. The brownstone apartment where I raised my 3 children still holds the same worn furniture, the same faded curtains that filter the morning light into golden streams across the hardwood floors. Every morning, I wake at 5:30, a habit from decades of preparing breakfast for a house full of hungry mouths. But now, the silence greets me like an unwelcome guest. The coffee maker gurgles its familiar song, but there's no one to share the aroma with. I move through my routine with mechanical precision, wiping counters that are already clean, folding towels that haven't been used, waiting for a phone that rarely rings. The apartment itself tells the story of my life in layers. The kitchen table where I helped with homework for 3 different children through countless grade levels. The living room carpet, worn thin in paths that lead from door to couch to hallway, traced by years of small feet running, teenage stomping, adult pacing during difficult conversations. The walls hold photographs that chart the progression of time. My wedding day, when my late husband Thomas looked at me like I hung the moon. The hospital photos of each baby, wrinkled and red-faced and perfect. Birthday parties with homemade cakes that never quite looked like the pictures in magazines but tasted of love anyway. High school graduations, college acceptances, weddings, and then grandchildren. Those precious faces that brought new purpose to my life. But lately, I'd noticed something. The photos stopped getting updated around 5 years ago. The last family portrait included everyone, all 3 of my children and their families, gathered at David's house for Thanksgiving. We're all smiling, but if you look closely, you can see the strain in my expression. The way I'm leaning slightly away from Jennifer, my son Michael's wife, as if my body knew what my mind refused to accept. The invitation came through text message, which should have been my first warning. My granddaughter Emma was performing in her school's spring dance recital, and my son Michael's message was brief, almost perfunctory. Mom, Emma's recital is Saturday at 3. Lincoln Park Community Center. No warmth, no personal touch, just the facts. I read it 3 times, searching for affection between the words, finding none. Still, my heart leaped. A chance to see Emma, to be part of her life, to matter. I spent the entire week preparing. I drove to the flower shop on Diversey, carefully selecting a bouquet of pink roses mixed with white lilies, Emma's favorite colors. I pressed my best dress, the navy one with the pearl buttons that Michael once said made me look elegant. I even got my hair done at the salon, splurging on highlights I couldn't really afford. The week leading up to the recital felt longer than usual. I found myself planning what I'd say to Emma, how I'd compliment her performance, what questions I'd ask about her dance training. I imagined Michael introducing me proudly to the other parents. This is my mother, Margaret. She was a teacher for 40 years. I imagined Jennifer softening, perhaps realizing that I wasn't the enemy, that I only wanted to be part of their lives. I imagined the boys, Emma's younger brothers, running to hug me the way they used to when they were toddlers. These fantasies sustained me through the lonely evenings, through the quiet dinners for one, through the long nights when sleep came reluctantly. I practiced my appearance in the mirror more times than I'd like to admit. Was the dress too formal? Not formal enough? Did the highlights make me look like I was trying too hard? I settled on understated elegance, or at least what I hoped passed for it. I wanted to look like a grandmother who had her life together, who wasn't desperately lonely, who wasn't counting the days between contacts with her family like a prisoner marking time on a cell wall. Saturday arrived with unseasonably warm weather, the kind of spring day that makes Chicago forget its brutal winters. I arrived 30 minutes early, clutching my bouquet and a small gift bag containing a silver bracelet I'd found at an antique shop. The community center buzzed with families, grandparents, siblings, all there to celebrate their children. I scanned the crowd for Michael and his wife, Jennifer, my heart already preparing for the reunion. When I spotted them, they were huddled with Jennifer's parents, laughing at some shared joke. I approached with my brightest smile, the one I'd practiced in the mirror. "Michael, Jennifer, hello." My voice sounded too eager, too desperate, even to my own ears. Jennifer turned, and the look she gave me froze my blood. It wasn't surprise or even annoyance. It was cold assessment. The kind of look you'd give a stranger who'd interrupted an important conversation. "Oh, Margaret, you came." The emphasis on "you" carried volumes of unspoken judgment. Michael barely glanced at me, his attention fixed on his phone. "Hey, Mom. Emma's about to go on. You should probably find a seat." Not "sit with us," not "we saved you a place." Just a dismissal wrapped in logistics. I watched as Jennifer's parents, the Hendersons, received warm hugs and animated conversation. Her mother was shown photos on Jennifer's phone, something about their recent vacation to the Bahamas, a trip I'd contributed $5,000 toward when Michael called last month, saying they were short on funds for the kids' summer activities. The money had been part of my retirement savings. Money I'd earned from 40 years as a public school teacher, carefully invested in modest stocks and bonds that had grown slowly but steadily over the decades. Standing there, clutching my flowers like a shield, I felt something crack inside me. It was subtle, like the first hairline fracture in a dam before it breaks. I watched Mrs. Henderson lean in to whisper something to Jennifer, both of them wearing matching designer handbags that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Mr. Henderson clapped Michael on the back like they were old friends, discussing golf handicaps and investment portfolios. They belonged to a world I'd never been part of, a world of country clubs and European vacations and casual wealth. And my son had chosen that world, or rather, he'd chosen Jennifer, who came with access to that world. I remembered when Michael first brought Jennifer home to meet me. She'd been recently divorced, struggling with 4 young children, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I'd liked her immediately, admired her resilience, her determination to provide for her kids despite impossible circumstances. When they got married, I'd welcomed her completely, treated her children like my own grandchildren, even though they called the Hendersons Grandma and Grandpa, and called me Miss Margaret. I'd told myself it didn't matter, that love wasn't about titles. But now, watching the easy affection between Jennifer's family and my son, I wondered if I'd been a fool. I found a seat in the back, alone, while the Hendersons sat front row center with Michael and Jennifer. During Emma's performance, a beautiful contemporary piece that brought tears to my eyes, I caught Jennifer whispering to her mother, both of them glancing back at me before dissolving into quiet laughter. The bouquet felt heavy in my hands. When the recital ended, I tried to approach Emma, my sweet granddaughter who used to call me every week, who used to beg to spend weekends at my apartment baking cookies and watching old movies. But Jennifer intercepted me, her smile sharp as glass. "Emma's exhausted, Margaret. We're taking her straight home. Maybe another time." There would be no another time, and we both knew it. I handed the flowers to Jennifer, who accepted them with the enthusiasm of someone receiving a parking ticket. The gift bag I slipped into my purse, unable to bear another rejection. As I walked to my car, I passed other families gathering in the parking lot. Grandparents being thanked profusely, children showing off their flowers and gifts, excited chatter about going out for ice cream to celebrate. One grandmother was being photographed with her granddaughter, both of them beaming at the camera. I watched this scene unfold like a visitor from another planet, observing a ritual I was no longer allowed to participate in. My car, a 12-year-old Toyota that I maintained meticulously because I couldn't afford to replace it, sat alone in the far corner of the lot. I'd parked there to leave the closer spots for families with young children, another small act of consideration that went unnoticed and unappreciated. I drove home through streets blurred by tears I refused to shed in public. The apartment welcomed me with its familiar emptiness. I placed the silver bracelet on my dresser, next to a photograph from Emma's baptism, when she was just 6 months old, and I was still considered essential to their lives. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day, searching for what I'd done wrong. Had I been too available? Too generous? Too needy? The questions circled like vultures, picking at my self-worth. The bedroom ceiling had a water stain in the corner, shaped vaguely like a bird in flight. I'd stared at that stain through countless sleepless nights over the years. The night Thomas died, suddenly and without warning from a heart attack at 52. The nights after each child left home, when the empty nest syndrome hit me like a physical blow. The night I retired from teaching, uncertain about my identity without the classroom that had defined me for decades. And now, this night, processing the slow-motion rejection that had been building for years, but that I'd been too afraid or too stubborn to acknowledge. The next morning, Sunday, my phone rang. Hope fluttered stupidly in my chest until I saw Michael's name. "Mom, can you help us out? Jennifer's car needs repairs." And with Emma's dance lessons and the boys' soccer, we're stretched thin. His voice carried the practiced casualness of someone who'd made this call many times before. I thought of my dwindling savings, the retirement account that had shrunk from nearly $200,000 to just under $80,000 in the past 5 years. Every emergency, every unexpected expense, every opportunity for the grandchildren had been funded by my careful investments, my teacher's pension, my Social Security checks. "How much do you need?" I heard myself ask, hating the resignation in my voice. "3,000 should cover it. You're a lifesaver, Mom. I'll pay you back." He'd said that before, dozens of times. The money never came back. Something in me wanted to challenge him right then. To ask why he couldn't get a loan from the Hendersons, who clearly had money to spare. To ask why Jennifer's car problems were my responsibility. To ask why, less than 24 hours after being treated like an unwanted stranger at my own granddaughter's recital, I was expected to open my wallet without question. But I didn't. The old patterns were too ingrained, the fear of conflict too strong, the desperate hope that maybe this time, maybe if I helped just one more time, they would finally appreciate me, finally love me the way I needed to be loved. The years of sacrifice played through my mind like a film reel I couldn't stop. I remembered the nights after my husband died when Michael was 15, my daughter Sarah was 12, and my youngest David was only 8. I worked 2 jobs, teaching during the day and tutoring at night, ensuring they had everything they needed. I remembered missing my own father's funeral because Michael had a football championship and couldn't drive himself. I remembered selling my mother's antique jewelry, pieces that had been in our family for generations, to pay for Sarah's college tuition when her scholarship fell through. I remembered co-signing David's business loan, the one that bankrupted him and left me responsible for $30,000 in debt that took me 7 years to pay off. That jewelry still haunts me sometimes. My grandmother's cameo brooch, my mother's pearl necklace that she'd received on her wedding day, the sapphire ring that had been passed down through 4 generations. I'd taken them to an estate jewelry buyer, a small shop on the north side run by a kind man who'd tried to talk me out of selling. "These have historical value," he'd said. "They're worth more than money." But Sarah needed $12,000 immediately, or she'd have to drop out of school, and I couldn't let that happen. So I sold pieces of my history, my inheritance, the tangible connections to the women who came before me. And Sarah had graduated, gotten a good job, built a successful career. She'd thanked me profusely at the time. But in the years since, the gratitude had faded, replaced by an expectation that I would always sacrifice whatever needed sacrificing. And what had I received in return? Silence, neglect. The slow, steady erosion of my worth in their eyes. I had become nothing more than a bank account with a pulse, a resource to be tapped when convenient and ignored when unnecessary. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and undeniable. That night, I transferred the $3,000 to Michael's account, watching my balance drop with a sick feeling in my stomach. Then, I did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and began researching financial advisors, looking for someone who could help me protect what little I had left. The numbers stared back at me from the screen, stark and unforgiving. At my current rate of giving, I'd be completely broke within 3 years. The financial advisor I found, a man named Robert Chen who specialized in retirement planning, painted an even bleaker picture when I met with him the following week. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, reviewing the spreadsheets I'd prepared documenting every withdrawal and transfer, "you're on track to exhaust your savings by age 70. After that, you'll be living on Social Security alone, which is barely enough to cover rent and basic expenses in Chicago. One medical emergency, one unexpected expense, and you could lose your apartment, end up in a nursing home on Medicaid." He looked at me with a mixture of professional concern and personal sympathy. "Who's been taking this money, and why?" I explained, my voice barely above a whisper, about the children and grandchildren, the emergencies and opportunities, the desperate desire to stay relevant in their lives. Robert listened without judgment, but when I finished, he shook his head. "Mrs. Sullivan, I see this pattern often, especially with widows and single mothers. Your children are adults. They're making choices that require more money than they have, and instead of adjusting their choices, they're adjusting your retirement. That's not sustainable. More importantly, it's not fair." The weeks that followed were a master class in emotional neglect. My birthday came and went on a Tuesday in late May. I waited all day for calls that never came. The mailbox held nothing but bills and advertisements. My phone remained silent except for robocalls about extended car warranties. I made myself a small cake, angel food with lemon frosting, the kind my mother used to make. I lit a single candle and sang happy birthday to myself, my voice cracking on the high notes. The loneliness was a physical presence in the room, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, mocking my solitude. I had raised 3 children, given everything I had to ensure their success, and on my 68th birthday, I was completely alone. The candle burned down slowly, wax pooling around the wick, melting into the frosting. I thought about making a wish before blowing it out, but what would I wish for? For my children to suddenly care? For Jennifer to have a change of heart? For the past 5 years to be different? Wishes felt like childish things. And I was tired of being childish. I was tired of hoping for things that would never materialize. So I blew out the candle without wishing, cut myself a slice of cake, and ate it mechanically, tasting nothing. Later that evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out the journals I'd kept when my children were young, thick spiral notebooks filled with observations and milestones and the mundane details of daily life. I read about Michael's first day of kindergarten, how he'd cried and clung to my leg until the teacher gently pried him away. I read about Sarah's ballet recital when she was 6, how proud she'd been of her costume, how she'd bowed so deeply she nearly fell over. I read about David learning to ride a bike, the summer evening when he finally found his balance and rode down the sidewalk, shrieking with joy and triumph. Those children, the ones in the journals, had loved me with the uncomplicated intensity that only children can manage. They'd needed me for everything, trusted me completely, believed I could solve any problem and heal any hurt. When had that changed? When had I become insufficient, burdensome, useful only as a source of money? I tried to rationalize their silence. They were busy, overwhelmed with their own lives, caught up in the chaos of raising children and managing careers. But excuses wore thin when I saw Sarah's Facebook post from her birthday party the previous month, a lavish affair at an expensive restaurant with all her friends and colleagues. I saw David's Instagram stories from his weekend golf trip with his buddies. And I saw Jennifer's constant stream of photos documenting every moment of her perfect life with my son and grandchildren, a life that somehow never included me unless money was needed. Jennifer's social media presence was particularly painful to witness. She posted daily, sometimes multiple times a day, photos of elaborate breakfasts with captions like, "Blessed to be able to nourish my family." Photos of the children in coordinated outfits with captions about the importance of family traditions. Photos of date nights with Michael at expensive restaurants. Vacation snapshots from beaches and ski resorts. Carefully curated images of a life that looked magazine perfect. And the Hendersons featured prominently in this digital scrapbook, always smiling, always generous, always present. I appeared in none of it, erased from the narrative as completely as if I'd never existed. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon in June. I was cleaning out my hall closet, a task I'd been avoiding for months, when I found a box of old letters and cards. Curious, I opened it, expecting to find sentimental reminders of better times. Instead, I found a printout of an email thread between Jennifer and her mother, dated from 2 years ago. My hands trembled as I read Jennifer's words, her casual cruelty laid bare in black and white. Michael's mother is so clingy. She calls all the time, wanting to be involved in everything. I don't know how she raised 4 kids. Oh wait, she only raised 3 and couldn't even manage that properly. David's a mess, Sarah's divorced, and Michael would be lost without me. Honestly, I raised 4 kids alone after my first marriage, and she couldn't even handle one daughter-in-law without making everything awkward. The email went on, detailing how they'd been limiting my contact with the grandchildren, how they'd been slowly freezing me out of family events, replacing me with Jennifer's parents who had more money and better connections. There were references to my financial contributions, always framed as expected rather than appreciated. She'll give us whatever we ask for because she's desperate to feel needed. It's actually kind of sad, but useful. Her mother had responded with laughing emojis and encouragement to keep working that angle. The printout slipped from my numb fingers, floating to the floor like a falling leaf. I stood frozen in the closet doorway, my world tilting on its axis. The betrayal wasn't just in the words themselves, but in the casual, almost cheerful way they discussed manipulating me. I had suspected their motives, felt the growing distance, sensed the insincerity, but having it confirmed in such stark terms was devastating. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, unable to cry, unable to scream, unable to do anything but sit in the wreckage of my illusions. How had this email ended up in my closet? I tried to reconstruct the possibilities. Michael and Jennifer had helped me move some boxes the previous Christmas, one of the rare occasions when they'd visited my apartment. Jennifer had used my printer for something, complaining that theirs was out of ink. She must have printed this email accidentally, or perhaps intentionally, but then forgotten it. Either way, she'd left evidence of her duplicity in my home, and I'd stumbled upon it like a character in a tragic play, discovering the conspiracy against them. The porcelain teacup I'd been holding shattered when it hit the hardwood floor, spraying Earl Grey tea across the hallway. I stared at the broken pieces, seeing a metaphor I was too tired to unpack. For hours, I sat there, reading and rereading that email, memorizing every cutting phrase, every dismissive comment, every calculated manipulation. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed 6, then 7, then 8. Darkness fell outside my windows, and still I sat, processing the death of the family I thought I had. When I finally moved, it was with purpose. I gathered every financial document I could find, every bank statement, every canceled check, every record of money I'd given to my children over the past decade. The numbers were staggering. Beyond the retirement savings I'd depleted, there were the small gifts, the emergency loans that were never repaid, the temporary help that became permanent. Conservative estimates put my total contributions at over $150,000. That money could have been a comfortable retirement, travel, security, freedom. Instead, it had bought me contempt and exclusion. I made tea, my hands steady now, and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. For the first time in my life, I was going to say no. Not just once, but systematically, permanently. I was going to establish boundaries, protect myself, reclaim my dignity. The fear of loneliness that had controlled me for so long seemed less frightening than the reality of being used. I would rather be alone than tolerated. I would rather have silence than false affection. I would rather have nothing than give everything to people who valued me at nothing. That night, I drafted an email to Michael. It took 17 attempts before I found the words. Michael, I can no longer provide financial assistance. I need to protect my retirement savings and ensure my own security. I love you and always will, but our relationship needs to change. I hope you can understand. I didn't mention the email I'd found. I didn't accuse or blame. I simply stated my new reality. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit send. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed, sleeping more soundly than I had in years. The response came within hours, though I didn't see it until the next morning. Michael's text messages filled my screen, a barrage of confusion, anger, and manipulation. Mom, what's going on? Are you okay? Did someone upset you? We can talk about this. Then, when I didn't immediately respond, the tone shifted. This isn't like you. Jennifer is really hurt. The kids are asking why Grandma doesn't love them anymore. The emotional blackmail was predictable, but no less painful. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my financial advisor, a professional I'd hired the week before, and asked him to help me restructure my accounts, create a will that reflected my values, and establish a trust that would ensure my remaining assets were protected. Sarah called next, her voice sharp with indignation. Mom, Michael told me you cut them off. What's gotten into you? They have 3 kids, they need help. You've always been there for us. Why are you being so selfish now? The word selfish struck me like a slap. Selfish for wanting to survive my retirement years with dignity? Selfish for refusing to bankrupt myself for children who couldn't be bothered to call on my birthday? I found my voice, calm and clear. Sarah, I've given everything I have for 40 years. It's not selfish to protect myself. It's necessary. She hung up on me. The silence after Sarah hung up was profound. I sat holding the phone, staring at the screen, processing what had just happened. My daughter, the child I'd sacrificed my mother's jewelry for, had called me selfish and hung up on me. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. Almost. I thought about calling her back, trying to explain, but what would be the point? She'd made her position clear. I was a resource that had suddenly and inexplicably stopped providing, and she was angry about it. My feelings, my needs, my survival didn't factor into her calculations. David, my youngest, was the only one who approached with anything resembling empathy. Mom, I heard what's happening. I get it. I know I wasn't always grateful for everything you did. If you need space, take it. Just know I love you. His words were a small comfort in the storm, though I wondered if his kindness would survive when he needed money and found me unwilling. Time would tell. I called David back later that day, needing to hear a friendly voice. He answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom, how are you holding up? The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly undid me. I'm okay, I managed. It's been hard, but I think I'm doing the right thing. David sighed. I think so too. Look, I know I've taken advantage of your generosity. That business loan that went south, I never properly thanked you for covering it. I was embarrassed, and I handled it badly. But I want you to know I see what you did for me. For all of us. And I'm sorry we didn't appreciate it more. We talked for nearly an hour, the longest conversation I'd had with any of my children in months. David told me about his new job, his plans to get his finances in order, his relationship with a woman he was serious about. He asked about my life, my interests, my plans. It was the kind of conversation I'd been craving, and it reminded me that not all my relationships were beyond repair, just most of them. Jennifer's parents entered the fray next, with Mr. Henderson calling from a number I didn't recognize. "Margaret, we need to discuss your behavior. Jennifer is beside herself. Those grandchildren need their grandmother and you're abandoning them over what, pride? Money? We thought you were better than this." His condescension ignited something fierce inside me. "Mr. Henderson, with all due respect, my relationship with my family is none of your concern. Jennifer has you and Mrs. Henderson, who clearly provide everything she needs. She doesn't need me, except as a source of funding. I'm done serving that purpose." I hung up before he could respond, my heart racing but my resolve firm. Within an hour of hanging up on Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson sent me a long text message. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, expressing concern for my mental state, suggesting I might be experiencing age-related cognitive decline, offering to help me find appropriate care. The subtext was clear. I was being difficult, possibly senile, certainly unreasonable. She ended with, "We're praying for you," which felt less like genuine concern and more like a socially acceptable way to say, "You're crazy and we hope you come to your senses." I blocked both of their numbers. It felt liberating. The attempts to manipulate me continued for weeks. Emma called, her young voice trembling. "Grandma, why don't you love us anymore? Mommy says you don't want to see us." The pain of that call nearly broke me. I reassured her that I loved her desperately, that this had nothing to do with her, that sometimes adults needed to make hard choices. But I could hear Jennifer coaching in the background, feeding her lines designed to wound me. When I gently suggested that Emma could visit me any time, she hesitated. "Mommy says you're not safe to be around right now." The call ended, and I wept for the relationship being poisoned against me. Using a child as a weapon is one of the cruelest things a parent can do, and Jennifer wielded Emma like a sword. I thought about calling child services, about documenting the emotional manipulation. But what would I report? That a mother was turning her daughter against a grandmother? That wasn't illegal, just deeply, profoundly wrong. Instead, I wrote a letter to Emma, explaining in age-appropriate terms that I loved her, that adult relationships were complicated, that sometimes people grew apart, but it didn't mean the love went away. I mailed it to their house, knowing Jennifer would probably intercept it, but needing to try anyway. But there was one bright spot in the darkness. Mrs. Clara Jenkins, my neighbor of 15 years, knocked on my door one evening with a homemade lasagna and a knowing smile. "I heard some of the phone calls through the walls," she admitted. "Thin construction in these old brownstones. Margaret, I want you to know that you're doing the right thing. I watched my sister get used up by her kids until there was nothing left of her. Don't let that be you." We sat together, eating lasagna and drinking wine, and for the first time in months, I felt seen. Clara didn't need anything from me. She just enjoyed my company. The novelty of that simple truth was almost overwhelming. Clara told me about her sister, Patricia, who died 3 years ago at 72. "She gave her children everything," Clara said, her eyes distant with memory. "Her money, her time, her health. She worked until she was 68 because she kept bailing them out of financial problems. When she finally retired, she had nothing saved. She ended up in a state-funded nursing home, and you know how often her kids visited? Once. One time in the 2 years before she died. They were too busy to see the woman who'd sacrificed everything for them." Clara's voice broke. "I don't want that to be you, Margaret. You deserve better." With Clara's encouragement, I took my first step toward liberation. When Michael called requesting money for a family vacation to Disney World, citing how it would create memories for the grandchildren, I said no. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like speaking a language I'd never learned. No, Michael. I can't help with that. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, his voice cold and clipped. Fine. We'll figure it out ourselves. Clearly we can't count on you anymore. He hung up, and I sat holding the phone, waiting for the guilt to crush me. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something light and unfamiliar. Relief. That night, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I made myself a proper dinner, not leftovers or something quick, but a real meal with a salad and a glass of wine. I set the table with my good china, the set I'd been saving for special occasions that never came. I lit candles and put on music, Ella Fitzgerald crooning about love and loss. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, present in the moment instead of worrying about who needed what from me. After dinner, I ran a bath with expensive oils I'd received as a gift years ago and never used. I soaked until the water grew cold, reading a novel I'd started and abandoned 3 times because family crises kept interrupting. The next morning, I woke without the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. No one needed me today. No one expected anything from me. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I made coffee and sat on my small balcony, watching the neighborhood wake up, feeling like a stranger in my own life. My phone stayed silent, and I realized I preferred it that way. The calls had always brought stress, never joy. They had been demands disguised as connection. Over the following weeks, I established new routines that centered on myself. I joined a book club at the local library, filled with women my age who had fascinating lives and stories. I started taking morning walks in Lincoln Park, feeding the ducks and watching the sunrise paint the Chicago skyline in shades of pink and gold. I volunteered at a community center teaching English to immigrants, finding purpose in helping people who genuinely appreciated my efforts. My bank account stopped hemorrhaging money. My stress levels dropped. I slept through the night for the first time in years. The book club became an unexpected source of joy. We met every other Wednesday at the library, a group of 8 women ranging in age from 60 to 82. We read everything from literary fiction to mysteries to memoirs, and our discussions ranged far beyond the books themselves. These women had lived full lives, survived divorces and widowhood, raised children, built careers, traveled the world. They had wisdom and humor and an irreverence that I found refreshing. When I cautiously shared my story, they nodded with understanding. Nearly every one of them had a similar tale of being used by family, of finally drawing boundaries, of choosing themselves. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I was part of a sisterhood I hadn't known existed. There was Eleanor, a former nurse who'd spent 20 years lending money to her gambling-addicted son before finally cutting him off. There was Ruth, a retired accountant whose daughter hadn't spoken to her in 5 years after she refused to buy her a house. There was Martha, whose entire family had expected her to provide free childcare for 7 grandchildren while they all worked, never once offering to pay her or even consistently thanking her. Each woman had a story, and each story resonated with mine in ways that were both heartbreaking and healing. Our third meeting, we were discussing a memoir about family estrangement, when Eleanor said something that changed my perspective entirely. "You know what I realized?" she said, her voice steady and clear. "My son didn't love me less when I stopped giving him money. He'd never really loved me at all. He loved what I could do for him. And once I accepted that painful truth, I could start grieving the relationship I thought we had and start building a life that didn't revolve around his needs." The words hung in the air, and I felt them settle into my bones like truth often does, uncomfortable and undeniable. We started meeting for coffee between book club sessions, this group of women who'd been strangers but became my lifeline. We went to museums together, tried new restaurants, attended concerts in the park. For the first time in decades, I had friendships that fed my soul instead of draining it. These women celebrated my small victories, the first time I said no without guilt. The first week I didn't check my phone, obsessively hoping for contact from my children. The first time I spent money on myself without feeling selfish. They understood in ways my family never had that self-care wasn't selfish, it was survival. But my family wasn't ready to let go so easily. The financial manipulation had been their primary tool, and with that avenue closed, they shifted tactics. Sarah started calling regularly, full of concern about my mental health. "Mom, we're worried about you. You're isolating yourself. This isn't healthy. Maybe you should talk to someone. Get some help." The implication was clear. I was unstable, possibly senile, certainly not competent to make my own decisions. I assured her I was fine, better than fine, but she persisted. "We're thinking of coming for a visit, just to check on you." The threat of an intervention hung unspoken between us. David sent long, rambling emails about family unity and forgiveness, quoting Bible verses about honoring parents and keeping families together. The irony of children lecturing their mother about family values wasn't lost on me. Michael simply stopped calling altogether, his silence a punishment designed to make me reconsider. But I had spent too many years chasing after people who didn't want to be caught. I was done performing for an audience that would never applaud. The real test came in late August. Jennifer's parents were hosting a family reunion at their summer home in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It was a lavish affair, from the descriptions I'd overheard, with catered food and rented boats and professional photographers to capture the perfect family moments. I wasn't invited. This wasn't surprising, but what came next was. Emma called from Jennifer's phone, her voice bright with excitement. "Grandma, we're having a big party at the Henderson's Lake House. Everyone's going to be there. Can you help pay for my new dress?" Mommy says the ones we have aren't nice enough for the photographer. The request was delivered with such innocence, such childlike trust, that Jennifer could manipulate through her. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Emma, sweetheart, I can't help with that. But I hope you have a wonderful time at the party." There was a pause. Then Jennifer's voice replaced Emma's, sharp and accusatory. "Really, Margaret? You can't even buy your granddaughter a dress? You'd rather she feel embarrassed in front of the whole family?" I could picture her, phone pressed to her ear, already composing the narrative of the selfish grandmother who valued money over her grandchild's happiness. "Jennifer, there are dresses in Emma's closet that are perfectly appropriate. This isn't about need. It's about manipulation. I'm not participating anymore." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking but my conscience clear. The party happened without me, as I'd known it would. Social media provided glimpses of the festivities, Jennifer's carefully curated posts showing a perfect family unburdened by my presence. The Hendersons presided over everything like benevolent monarchs, their wealth and influence on full display. My children smiled in the photos, their arms around Jennifer's parents, the replacement grandparents who asked for nothing and gave everything. I studied those images for longer than I should have, searching for some sign that I was missed, finding none. But something had shifted inside me. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined me. I made a decision that night. I was going to visit a lawyer, not just for financial planning, but to make my wishes crystal clear. My will would be updated to reflect the truth of my relationships. The bulk of my estate, what little remained, would go to charities that actually helped people, organizations that supported abandoned elderly, literacy programs, music education for underprivileged children. My children would receive token amounts, enough to make the will legal, but not enough to sustain their entitled lifestyles. And I would include a letter explaining my choices. Not to hurt them, but to speak truths I'd been too afraid to say while alive. Attorney Patricia Morrison sat across from me in her downtown office. Her expression sympathetic but professional as I explained my situation. "Mrs. Sullivan, I handle cases like this more often than you'd think. Adult children who view their parents as ATMs, who take and never give back. You're making the right choice to protect yourself." She drafted documents that gave me control over my finances, established healthcare directives that excluded my children from decision-making roles, and created a will that reflected my values rather than their expectations. Signing those papers felt like signing my own Declaration of Independence. September brought crisp air and the promise of autumn, my favorite season. The leaves in Lincoln Park began their transformation, shifting from green to brilliant shades of amber and crimson. I started planning something I'd dreamed about for years but never thought possible. A trip. Not a family vacation where I'd pay for everyone and manage the logistics while receiving no appreciation. A solo trip, just for me, to a place I'd always wanted to visit. I'd taught American literature for 4 decades, and New Orleans had always called to me, that mystical city of jazz and history and resilience. I booked a 2-week trip for October, splurging on a charming bed and breakfast in the Garden District. The cost made me wince, old habits dying hard, but I reminded myself this was what money was for. Living, experiencing, not hoarding for emergencies that my children would manufacture and I would fund. I told no one about my plans, not even Clara, worried that somehow the information would leak and my family would find a way to ruin it. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally came in mid-September. Michael showed up at my apartment unannounced, Jennifer and all 3 grandchildren in tow. I heard them in the hallway before they knocked, Jennifer's voice instructing the kids to look sad and tell Grandma you miss her. The manipulation was so blatant, so shameless, it almost made me laugh. Almost. I opened the door to find them arranged like a tableau, each face wearing an expression of practiced sorrow. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael began, pushing past me into the apartment without invitation. Jennifer followed, herding the children in with theatrical sighs. "This has gone on long enough. You're tearing this family apart over money. Do you know how selfish that makes you? How much you're hurting these kids?" He gestured to Emma and her brothers, who looked more confused than hurt, clearly not understanding the script they were supposed to follow. I remained standing, refusing to sit and play the gracious hostess. "Michael, you and Jennifer are welcome to leave anytime. The children can stay if they'd like. We can make cookies and talk about school." Emma's face lit up at the suggestion, but Jennifer quickly squashed it. "They're not staying. We came here as a family to tell you that your behavior is unacceptable. You owe us an explanation." The word "owe" triggered something primal in me. "I owe you nothing," I said quietly, each word deliberate. "I gave you everything for years. My time, my money, my energy, my love. I sacrificed my own retirement, my own dreams, my own life to ensure you had everything you needed. And what did I get in return? Contempt, manipulation, exclusion." I found the email, Jennifer. The one where you called me clingy and pathetic and talked about how useful it was that I'd give you whatever you asked for. Jennifer's face went pale, then flushed red. "You went through my private correspondence? That's a violation of—" I cut her off. "It was printed out and left in my hall closet. Perhaps you should be more careful with your cruelty." Michael looked between us, confused. "What email? What's she talking about?" Jennifer waved her hand dismissively. "Nothing. She's making things up. She's clearly not well, Michael. I told you we should have brought a doctor." I walked to my bedroom and retrieved the printout, which I'd kept as evidence of my sanity when they inevitably tried to paint me as delusional. I handed it to Michael without a word. He read it slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to discomfort to something that might have been shame. "Jen, did you write this?" His voice was small, a little boy asking his wife to please tell him this wasn't real. Jennifer snatched the paper from his hands. "So what if I did? I was venting to my mother. You're not supposed to read other people's private conversations. And honestly, Margaret, a lot of what I said was true. You do call too much. You are clingy. And we have needed your money because raising 3 kids is expensive, something you should understand." The children stood frozen, sensing the adult tension, but not understanding its source. I knelt down to Emma's level, ignoring the argument brewing behind me. "Sweetheart, Grandma loves you so much. But sometimes grown-ups have disagreements. Why don't you and your brothers go look at the photo albums in the living room? I have pictures of your daddy when he was your age." Emma nodded, taking her brother's hands and leading them away from the conflict. Standing back up, I faced Jennifer directly. "You're right about one thing. Raising children is expensive. I know because I raised 3 of them alone after my husband died, working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything. And I never once asked my parents for money because I understood that my choices were my responsibility. You and Michael chose to have 3 children. You chose a lifestyle that requires 2 incomes and careful budgeting. Those choices don't obligate me to fund them, especially when I'm treated with such disrespect." Michael finally found his voice. "Mom, I didn't know she felt that way. I didn't know about the email, but can't we work through this? We're family." The plea in his voice was genuine, and for a moment, I wavered. But then I remembered the birthday that passed unacknowledged, the dance recital where I was invisible, the years of watching them choose Jennifer's parents over me for everything meaningful, while still expecting my financial support. "Michael, I will always love you. You're my son. But I won't be used anymore. I won't fund vacations I'm not invited on. I won't pay for private schools while being excluded from school events. I won't be the bank you withdraw from without ever making deposits of affection or respect." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared for this moment, knowing it would come eventually. Inside were copies of every check I'd written, every transfer I'd made, every financial contribution over the past 10 years. "This is what I've given you. $173,000. That money represented my security, my retirement, my future. And you treated it like it was owed to you." Jennifer's eyes widened at the number. Even she hadn't realized the full extent of what I'd provided. Michael looked physically ill. "Mom, I'll pay you back. I promise. We'll work out a payment plan." I shook my head. "I don't want the money back. It's gone, and I've made peace with that. But there won't be any more. From now on, my finances are my own. If you need money, get a second job, cut expenses, make sacrifices like I did. Like every parent does." Jennifer recovered quickly, her tone shifting to wounded innocence. "I can't believe you're being so vindictive. We made one mistake, and you're willing to destroy your relationship with your grandchildren over it? What kind of grandmother does that?" The gaslighting was impressive in its audacity. I almost admired the skill required to twist my self-preservation into an attack on her children. "The kind who finally understands her worth," I replied calmly. "The kind who refuses to teach her grandchildren that love can be bought, or that family members exist to be exploited. I hope someday you'll tell them the truth about why we're distant, but I suspect you'll paint me as the villain. That's your choice. Mine is to live the rest of my life with dignity." I walked to the door and opened it, a clear signal that this conversation was over. "You need to leave now. The children can visit me any time with proper notice and without you using them as emotional weapons. But you and Michael are not welcome here until you can treat me with basic respect." Jennifer grabbed the kids and stormed out, her fury palpable. Michael lingered, his face a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. "Mom, I'm sorry. For all of it. I should have noticed. I should have protected you from—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "Protected me from your wife?" I supplied gently. "From your own neglect? Michael, you're an adult. You made choices. You let her treat me that way because it was convenient. Because you benefited from it too. I hope you'll think about that and make different choices moving forward. But I can't wait around hoping you'll change. I have to take care of myself now." He left without another word, and I closed the door behind him, leaning against it as the adrenaline drained from my body. The apartment felt larger somehow, emptier, but also more mine. I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth. And I had survived. Clara appeared at my door minutes later, having heard the commotion through the walls. She didn't ask questions, just hugged me and made tea, and we sat together in companionable silence while I processed what had happened. That night, I slept fitfully, my dreams a jumble of confrontations and reconciliations that would never happen. But morning came, as it always does, and with it a sense of finality. I had drawn my line in the sand. Whatever came next would be on my terms. I spent the day organizing my life, clearing out closets, donating clothes I no longer wore, throwing away mementos that carried more pain than joy. It felt like shedding old skin, emerging newer and lighter. The weeks leading up to my New Orleans trip passed quietly. My phone barely rang. My inbox filled only with spam. The silence that had once terrified me became peaceful. I attended my book club, went to movies by myself, joined a water aerobics class at the community center. I made friends with other women my age who had their own stories of familial disappointment and personal rediscovery. We shared meals and laughter and the kind of authentic connection that had been missing from my life for too long. 3 days before my scheduled departure, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Jennifer, her voice thick with tears. "Margaret, please, I need to talk to you. Can I come over?" Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to protect myself from whatever manipulation she had planned. But curiosity won out. "All right, come alone. No Michael, no kids, no ambush." She agreed, and within an hour she was at my door. Jennifer looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair hung limp, her designer clothes were wrinkled, and her face was bare of the makeup she typically wore like armor. She sat on my couch, crying genuine tears that seemed to surprise even her. "I'm so sorry," she began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've been awful to you. Worse than awful. I manipulated you and used you and convinced myself you deserved it because you weren't like my own mother. She died when I was young, and I resented you for being alive when she wasn't. It's not an excuse, but it's the truth." I sat across from her, maintaining distance, waiting to see where this confession would lead. When my first husband left me with 4 kids and nothing, I swore I'd never be vulnerable again. I'd never depend on anyone. And when I met Michael, I saw how much he loved and respected you, and I hated it. I hated that you had this claim on him that I couldn't control. So I set out to diminish you, to make you less important, to replace you with my own parents who I could control completely. The honesty was jarring, more than I'd expected. "And now?" I asked quietly. "What changed?" Jennifer wiped her eyes, mascara smudging despite her efforts. "My father had a stroke last week. He's going to be okay, but it made me realize how temporary everything is, how quickly you can lose people. And I thought about you, about how I've treated you, and I felt sick. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I see what I did. I see how wrong it was. Part of me wanted to accept this apology, to rebuild the bridge, to have my family back. But I'd learned too much about myself in the past months to fall back into old patterns. Jennifer, I appreciate you saying this. I believe you mean it right now, in this vulnerable moment when you're afraid of losing your own father. But I need more than words. I need sustained change. I need to see, over time, that you respect me as a person, not just as a source of money or childcare or whatever other utility I might serve." She nodded, wiping her nose with a tissue. "I understand. Can I ask, what would that look like? What would I need to do?" The question felt like a trap, like she wanted me to provide a checklist she could complete to earn back my trust, and presumably my checkbook. But I answered honestly. "I don't know. Maybe start by telling your children the truth about why we've been distant. Stop using them as weapons. Include me in family events because you want me there, not because you need something. Call me occasionally just to talk, without an agenda. And give me space to decide if and when I'm ready to fully reconcile. This isn't something you can fix in one conversation. Jennifer stayed for another hour, and we talked more honestly than we ever had before. She told me about her childhood, the poverty and instability after her mother's death, the desperation that shaped her adult choices. I told her about my own losses, the loneliness of widowhood, the fear of irrelevance that made me such an easy mark for exploitation. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was understanding. When she left, I felt neither elated nor devastated, just cautiously hopeful that maybe eventually we could find a healthier way forward. I told no one about Jennifer's visit, not even Clara. It felt too fragile, too uncertain to expose to outside opinions. I continued with my preparations for New Orleans, packing light and planning my itinerary with excitement I hadn't felt in years. When I finally boarded the plane, watching Chicago shrink below me, I felt like I was shedding not just a city but an entire version of myself. New Orleans wrapped around me like a warm, slightly chaotic embrace. The French Quarter pulsed with life, jazz pouring from doorways, the smell of beignets and coffee mixing with the river air. I walked for hours, getting delightfully lost, stopping to listen to street musicians, accepting beads from strangers during impromptu parades. The city felt alive in a way Chicago never had, or perhaps I was finally alive enough to notice. My first morning, I woke to the sound of a trumpet player practicing somewhere down the street. The melody drifted through my open window, mixing with the scent of jasmine and the distant clatter of streetcars. I dressed slowly, choosing a colorful sundress I'd bought specifically for this trip, something younger and brighter than I'd normally wear. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked hopeful. She looked free. I spent that first day wandering without a map or agenda, something I'd never done in my life. Every street corner offered something new. A gallery displaying local art, a shop selling handmade pralines, a courtyard garden hidden behind iron gates where tourists weren't supposed to go, but where a kind stranger invited me in anyway. "You look like you need to see something beautiful," the elderly man said. And he was right. The garden was a riot of color and fragrance, and I sat on a stone bench for nearly an hour, just breathing and being. At a cafe on Royal Street, I met Diane, a woman near my age who was also traveling solo. We bonded over café au lait and discovered we were staying at the same bed and breakfast. She had kind eyes and laugh lines that spoke of a life fully lived. When she asked if I was traveling alone, I said yes with pride instead of shame. "Good for you," she said, raising her cup in a toast. "So am I. First time in 43 years. Diane became my companion for much of the trip, though we gave each other space when needed. She was a retired nurse from Boston, newly divorced after 40 years of marriage, reclaiming her identity one adventure at a time. We took a swamp tour, visited plantations, and spent an entire day at the World War II Museum, both of us quietly emotional as we walked through history. In the evenings, we sat on the balcony of our bed and breakfast, drinking wine and sharing our stories. I told her everything, the whole painful saga, and she listened without judgment, offering her own tales of familial complexity. Diane's story was different from mine, but equally painful. Her husband had left her for a younger woman, a cliché so common it had become a joke, except when you're living it. There's nothing funny about it. Her adult children had sided with their father, accusing Diane of being cold and unaffectionate, rewriting 40 years of history to justify their abandonment. "They act like I was the villain in their childhood," she told me one night, her voice thick with wine and emotion. "But I was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every triumph and failure." Where was he? At work? At golf? With his mistress, as it turns out. But somehow I'm the bad guy. We spent hours comparing notes, finding dark humor in the similarities of our situations. Both of us had given everything to families who couldn't see our worth. Both of us had been deemed difficult when we finally stood up for ourselves. Both of us had been labeled selfish for wanting basic respect. And both of us, finally, were learning to build lives that didn't revolve around people who didn't truly value us. One afternoon, we took a cooking class together, learning to make authentic gumbo and jambalaya from a chef who'd been born in the 9th Ward and had returned after Katrina to rebuild. She talked about resilience and community and the strength it takes to start over. Sometimes, she said, stirring the roux with practiced hands, you got to let the old things burn away before you can build something new. That's what makes the flavor deep. Diane and I exchanged glances, both of us understanding the metaphor extended far beyond the kitchen. One night, we went to Preservation Hall to hear traditional jazz. The music filled that small, sacred space, and I found myself crying, overwhelmed by the beauty and the release and the sheer joy of being exactly where I wanted to be, with no obligations to anyone but myself. Diane took my hand and squeezed it, understanding without needing explanation. After the show, we walked along the Mississippi River, watching the lights play on the dark water, and I felt something settle inside me. Peace. Maybe even happiness. I returned to Chicago transformed. The brownstone apartment that had felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary. I'd shipped home souvenirs for myself, artwork and books, and a beautiful jazz record I'd play while cooking. Clara noticed the change immediately. "You look 10 years younger," she declared, insisting I join her for dinner and tell her everything. As I recounted my adventures, I realized I'd barely thought about my family drama for 2 entire weeks. The constant anxiety, the checking my phone for messages that wouldn't come, the circular thoughts about what I'd done wrong, all of it had been absent. I'd simply lived. A few days after my return, Emma called from Michael's phone. "Grandma, Mommy said you went on a trip. Did you bring me something?" The innocent question made me smile. "I did, sweetheart. Would you like to come visit and see?" There was a pause, muffled conversation. Then Emma came back on. "Mommy says she'll bring me on Saturday if that works for you." It was Wednesday. Jennifer was asking, not demanding, giving me notice, following the boundaries I'd set. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Saturday arrived, and so did Emma, alone with Jennifer, who asked tentatively if she could come in for a few minutes. I agreed, and we sat in my living room like polite strangers, making small talk while Emma explored my New Orleans treasures. I'd bought her a children's book about the city, illustrated beautifully, and a small mask decorated with feathers and sequins. Emma was delighted, putting on the mask and dancing around the living room, making us both laugh. Jennifer watched her daughter with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she said, "Margaret, I've been in therapy, twice a week, working through a lot of things. My therapist helped me see how I projected my abandonment issues onto you, how I punished you for my mother's death even though you had nothing to do with it. I'm trying to change. It's slow, and I mess up still, but I'm trying." I nodded, acknowledging her efforts without committing to anything. "That's good, Jennifer. Therapy is hard work. I'm glad you're doing it." She left after 20 minutes, giving Emma a hug and promising to return in 2 hours. "Take your time with Grandma," she said, and there was no sarcasm in it, no hidden agenda I could detect. Emma and I made cookies, the kitchen filling with the smell of chocolate chips and vanilla. We talked about school and her friends and her dance classes. She didn't mention the money troubles or the family drama or any of the adult complexities that had poisoned our relationship. She was just a kid spending time with her grandmother, and it was enough. Over the following months, small changes accumulated. Jennifer started sending me occasional photos of the kids, not asking for anything, just sharing moments. Michael called on my birthday, a short but genuine conversation where he asked about my life rather than talking about his own needs. Sarah invited me to lunch, just the 2 of us, and apologized for not believing me when I'd tried to explain my side. David continued his steady presence, calling every Sunday like clockwork, never asking for money, just wanting to connect. The financial boundaries remained firm. When Michael mentioned struggling with Christmas gifts, I resisted the old urge to swoop in and solve the problem. "That's tough," I said sympathetically. "Maybe the kids could make handmade gifts this year. Some of my favorite childhood memories are the crafts we made for relatives." He paused, then laughed. "Yeah, I guess we could do that. Thanks, Mom." No request for money, no guilt trip when I didn't offer it. Progress. I spent my first holiday season in years doing exactly what I wanted. Clara and I volunteered at a soup kitchen on Thanksgiving, serving meals to people who had even less than I did. It put my own struggles in perspective and filled me with gratitude for what I had, not bitterness for what I'd lost. Christmas was quiet, just me and a small tree and a stack of books I'd been meaning to read. My children sent cards and small gifts. I sent cards back, with gift certificates to local restaurants for the families to enjoy together. No cash, no large checks, just thoughtful gestures that showed I cared without enabling dependency. The new year brought unexpected developments. Jennifer's father made a full recovery from his stroke, and in his rehabilitation, he and Mrs. Henderson reassessed their relationship with Michael's family. They began pulling back on their financial support, encouraging Michael and Jennifer to budget better and live within their means. Ironically, this created an opportunity for Jennifer and me to connect on more equal ground. She called one evening, frustrated and scared about their financial situation, and I listened without offering to fix it. "You'll figure it out," I told her. "You're smart and capable. Make a budget, cut unnecessary expenses. Maybe Jennifer could go back to work part-time now that the kids are all in school." These were the same suggestions I would have made before, but now they came without an accompanying check. She heard them differently because of it. Spring arrived, and with it an invitation that surprised me. Michael and Jennifer were renewing their vows for their 15th anniversary, a small ceremony in their backyard with close family only. The invitation was handwritten, Jennifer's careful cursive expressing that they would be honored by my presence. No mention of money, no requests for help with catering or decorations. Just an invitation to witness and celebrate. I attended, wearing a dress I'd bought in New Orleans, feeling both nervous and hopeful. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. When they exchanged vows, Michael included a line about honoring all the women who'd shaped him, specifically mentioning me and what I'd taught him about sacrifice and strength. I cried, genuine tears of mixed emotions. Jennifer's vows mentioned her own mother, and then, looking directly at me, she said, "And I vow to honor the family we've built together, including those I've wronged but who've shown me grace." It wasn't perfect, but it was real. At the reception, Emma grabbed my hand and pulled me to the dance floor. We swayed to jazz music, and she whispered, "I'm glad you're here, Grandma. Mommy said you might not come because we were mean to you, but I always loved you." Children's honesty cuts both ways. I always loved you too, sweetheart. Always. Over her shoulder, I caught Jennifer's eye. She mouthed, "Thank you," and I nodded, accepting the gratitude without needing to diminish it or inflate it. We were all works in progress. Summer found me planning another trip, this time to Nashville, because why not? I'd discovered I loved traveling, loved the freedom of exploring new places on my own terms. Clara decided to join me, and we spent a week immersed in country music and Southern food and the kind of laughter that only comes from genuine friendship. My children knew where I was, and they didn't protest or guilt me about spending their inheritance. They seemed to accept that I had a life beyond being their mother, their bank, their safety net. One evening in Nashville, sitting on a rooftop bar overlooking the city lights, Clara raised her glass of bourbon. "To liberation," she toasted. "To women who finally understand their worth." We clinked glasses, and I felt the truth of it settle in my bones. I had spent 68 years learning to value myself, and while I wished I'd learned sooner, I was grateful I'd learned it all. Better late than never. When I returned home, there was a letter waiting from Sarah. She'd written instead of called, wanting to express something too complicated for a phone conversation. In careful handwriting, she detailed her own reckoning with how she'd treated me, how her divorce had made her empathize with my widowhood in ways she'd never understood before. She apologized for her judgment, her selfishness, her failure to see me as a whole person rather than just a mother-shaped ATM. She ended with a request. Could we start over, slowly, building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt? I wrote back immediately. Yes, I said. Let's start over. The relationship rebuilding was slow, sometimes awkward, frequently imperfect. There were setbacks and misunderstandings. Jennifer still occasionally slipped into old patterns of manipulation before catching herself. Michael sometimes forgot that I wasn't available to drop everything for his needs. Sarah and I had to learn how to talk to each other as adults rather than as mother and disappointing daughter. But the trajectory was positive, the effort genuine, and I found myself cautiously optimistic about the future. My financial situation stabilized and even improved. Without the constant drain of supporting adult children, my retirement accounts began to grow again. My advisor helped me make some smart investments in stocks and index funds. Nothing risky but steady growth that gave me security. I even purchased a small amount of Bitcoin at his suggestion, diversifying my assets in ways I'd never imagined. The money wasn't vast, but it was mine, and it was enough. More than enough. I could live comfortably, travel occasionally, and still leave something meaningful to charity when I died. As autumn painted Chicago in familiar golds and crimsons, I found myself reflecting on the past year. The woman who'd sat alone on her 68th birthday, crying into homemade cake, felt like someone I'd known in another lifetime. That woman had been so desperate for connection she'd accepted crumbs and called them love. She'd been so afraid of loneliness she'd tolerated abuse and called it family. She'd been so conditioned to serve others she'd forgotten she was worth serving too. The woman I'd become was different. Not harder exactly, but clearer. More certain of her boundaries, more confident in her worth, more willing to be alone than to be mistreated. I had learned that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is being surrounded by people who don't see you. Solitude is being alone with someone you respect, yourself. I'd learned that family is not defined by blood or obligation, but by mutual care and respect. I'd learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life, your dignity, your right to happiness. One October evening, I sat on my balcony wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunset over the Chicago skyline. The air carried the first hint of winter's chill, but I felt warm, content. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Can we bake cookies this weekend? Just you and me? I smiled, texting back my agreement. Another message came, this one from Diane in Boston, sharing photos from her latest solo adventure in Portugal and urging me to join her in spring for a trip to Ireland. The possibilities stretched before me, limited only by my imagination and courage. I thought about the email I'd found all those months ago, Jennifer's cruel words that had shattered my illusions and, paradoxically, freed me. That betrayal had been a gift, forcing me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. If I'd never seen those words, I might have continued in that painful limbo indefinitely, giving everything and receiving nothing, dying slowly from emotional starvation while convincing myself it was love. The sunset deepened, purples and pinks streaking across the sky. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to myself, to the journey I'd taken, to the woman I'd fought to become, to every person who'd ever felt used, diminished, or taken for granted. It's not too late. You can say no. You can establish boundaries. You can choose yourself without being selfish. You deserve to be loved without having to purchase that love. You deserve respect, consideration, and genuine affection. And if your family cannot or will not provide those things, You can create a chosen family from friends and community who value you. The stars emerged one by one, pinpricks of light against the darkening sky. I thought about all the years ahead, however many I had left, and felt excited rather than afraid. There were places to visit, books to read, friends to make, grandchildren to bake cookies with on my own terms. There was a life to live, finally. Authentically, mine. I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll take a moment to think about it honestly. Have you ever experienced this kind of situation? Have you given and given to family members who took without gratitude, who exploited your love and generosity until there was nothing left? Or do you know someone who's living this reality right now, too afraid or conditioned to establish boundaries? Please share your story in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. And if this story resonated with you, if you felt seen or understood or inspired, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories matter. They reach people who need them, who feel alone in their struggles, who wonder if change is possible. By subscribing and sharing, you help that message spread to those who need it most. Thank you for listening to my journey. Thank you for being here.